Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Little Lighthouse. I'm Carly, and I'll be your host. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a writer and musician and active citizen living in Encinitas, which is outside of San Diego, California. So happy to have you. And again, thank you for coming. I know it's been a really, really crazy time, really, really busy with a lot of projects, right?
Absolutely, yes. But I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. Awesome. So how's it going with COVID right now in your area in Utah? And how's it
So currently I'm in Provo, Utah right now. I'm up here with my grandkids. One of my eldest granddaughter had to do her end of the year school testing. So, but down on Navajo Nation, I understand there a couple of days ago there was at least 13 new cases of COVID. And so they had implemented the curfews again from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Um, and so we're just there's one thing about Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez is that he's really keeping an eye on everything where COVID is concerned, and so just really keeping the people in mind and because of it we have been able to vaccinate a number of people across the Navajo Nation, not just on Navajo Nation alone, but across into other part of the states as well.
great? That's awesome. So good to hear. I'm really glad to hear it. Yeah, we're getting closer here to vaccinating a good portion of the population. So maybe I'll just start really quickly. I definitely wanted to just say how much I appreciated the article that your mom co-authored a couple days ago. It was an op-ed in the New York Times. And for everybody online, I definitely suggest that you read it at some point. I will put that in the chat later. So the article is an op-ed about the women of Bears Ears. So Bears Ears National Monument was a monument that Obama made and then Trump slashed by 85%. And so now the women of Bears Ears are getting together to ask Biden and Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland to reinstate Bears Ears, essentially. So you come from so you're an activist, but your mom is also really active, and it sounds like you come from a really long line of amazing women. Can you tell us just a little bit about your family and about the women in your life who are important to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the real story started back about 5 generations ago when my grandmother at that time was taken from Hopi and brought to Navajo. The lady that she was brought to was of the Bítahníí clan on Navajo. So instead of taking her in as a as a slave, like her husband had intended her to be, the Bítahníí lady raised her as her own, and that's how we came to be on Navajo. Fast forwarding to 4 generations later, my grandmother was born, and her father was of the Hopi descent. I'm sorry, somebody's knocking on my door,
Oh, take your time.
and so
Take your time. I was like, that is very psychedelic. What's happening?
and her father was Hopi as well, and so we pretty much had kept the Hopi lineage in our family. And my grandmother, when she was born, she was orphaned at 2 months old, and so after she was born, her mom had passed, my great grandmother had passed, and so my great grandfather went and gave my grandmother to her aunt to raise. But while growing up as a young girl and being raised by my grandmother was my great great grandmother was an elderly lady, so then couldn't really take care of an infant baby. So left most of that to my aunt, my great aunt. And so, but instead of raising her like with love and care, that aunt was pretty cruel to her. Had my grandmother spend a night at the sheep corral with the flocks there. And when we were growing up, my grandmother would tell us stories about how the sheep and the horses and the cows were more her family than her own family. And so just surviving her childhood and being a very strong lady, she helped to support families within our community at that time, back in the early 30, 40, 50s. She had a flock of at least 300 goats and sheep combined. And so she had, an account at the local trading post. And so families would come to her and say, we're in need of some food. So she would go to the trading post and purchase food items and whatever family needed and put it on her account. And so she was very resilient, if she was, if she had gone to school, she would have been, my mother used to say, she would have been a very she would have been very knowledgeable in business and stuff. Probably would have started her own business.
Yeah, awesome. Amazing. Yeah, she sounds like a really industrious and inspiring lady.
And going forward, my mom was a preemie, so she was really, that was something that my mom struggled through the years. And my grandfather didn't help matters any by just spoiling her to death, just having her get her way and stuff. And I think that's a lot of the reasons what gave her strength is that she argued and stood her ground when she wanted something and knew something needed to happen. And so definitely my grandmothers through the line, and my mother, and even my sisters and my other aunts, they've really taken what my grandmother had instilled in them and still to this day utilize that knowledge.
Wow, beautiful. So
yeah, I have a sister that's also a part of the Women of Bears Ears.
Oh wow, what's her name?
Her name is Meredith Benally.
Okay, because I've been seeing other Benalis pop up, and I'm like, oh, I think it might be related to Tara. So in that article too, that's talking about Bears Ears, your mom and the other women talk about the concept of rematriation and giving the land back to people who are connected with the earth, and women in particular. So can you just tell us a little bit about what rematriation is and why it's important?
Rematriation is putting the women back into the conversations where family is concerned, and we talk about the earth as our mother. She provides for us. She provides the water, the food, and just the elements for us to be able to exist on her. And that's basically what we saw happening with the Bears Ears movement. We needed to have a female voice in that movement. Yes, we had 3 women on the board of Utah Navajo who helped support the movement when Bears Ears was first established as a national monument. But since then, it seemed to me and a couple of other of the women in the group that the voices were starting to be pushed to the side, and so we felt like it was important that we needed to stand up and just stand our ground and say, you need to hear our side of the story as well, because we are connected to the earth just as much as you are. These are our teachings, and these are teachings that we need to carry down to our kids, to that child that's going to be born in the next 2 minutes or in the next several years, or even in the next couple of generations. So we felt like that was something that needed to happen. Being a part of the different things with different organizations, I felt and I could see our youth getting lost because they had no sense of identity, no sense of who they were, where they were coming from. There's a few children or youth out there who do know, whose parents taught them about their families and their lineage and stuff, but we're losing our kids on a day-to-day basis through drugs and alcohol abuse and through just being kidnapped and murdered and just for whatever reason. And so it was something that we felt like as mothers and as women and as grandmothers that we needed to really elevate our voice and to let our kids know that we are there for them and that we are fighting for them and we want to make things possible for them as well.
Beautiful. we have a few mothers on the line right now, so I know they'll appreciate that very much. So just going back a little bit, so you have all these projects that you're working on right now, but just a few years ago you were working on construction. So how did you get into activism and organizing? And I mean, it sounds like your family obviously inspired you.
Absolutely. My being in construction, I think more or less I was influenced by my dad. My dad was a structural welder. And I wanted to do something different. And so I got into construction after I graduated high school. The main reason why I wanted to get into construction as well was because my community members within just across the 7 chapters across southern San Juan County were needing homes, were in need of homes. Materials were being brought to them, but there wasn't anyone to build those homes for them. So a lot of the times materials were wasted, they were stolen, and they just withered and just went to waste there and outside without any type of covering or anything. And so when I left high school and decided to go to college, that was the one thing that I had promised myself and to my community, that I would come home and do something for them. What that meant really at the time, I wasn't sure, but I knew for sure housing was one of the things that I wanted to do. So fast forward in 2013, I was able to go to work for the Utah Navajo Trust Fund, who was helping to build homes for the Navajos across southern San Juan County, Utah. And by 2013, I had helped to complete over 30 homes across San Juan County, Utah, southern San Juan County, Utah, on the Navajo reservation. And so I feel that I had put a pretty good track record down for myself and people, and I built a really good rapport with my community members. And so I felt like it was time for me to move on and really focus on other things. While I was working on these families' homes, I would sit down and talk to them during my lunch break or before work started at the beginning of the day, and I would just converse with them and just talk about what they went through on a day-to-day basis, and really earn their trust and just built a rapport with them. And the whole idea of building a home wasn't enough anymore. There was quality education that we needed for our kids, quality healthcare, road maintenance, infrastructure across Navajo. And so the list just got longer and longer. By 2016, I had decided to retire from construction and go on into doing something more for the people. What that meant at the time, I wasn't sure. I went back to school, not by choice, but one day my sister called me and asked me for my social security number. And I'm like, wait, what? You just don't share that information with anybody. And she goes, yeah, you're going to share it with me because you're going back to school. I signed you up. So
makes sense.
Right. And she signed me up for legal assistant and advocacy. And that was, I think, the introduction to a lot of the work that I started to do in 2018 when Rural Utah Project first approached me to hire on with them to do the voter registration across southern San Juan County.
Beautiful. Wow. And so what of all the work that you did during 2020, what are you most proud of? What are you most proud of? And what were some of the things?
I think the biggest thing that really moves me, and I can't reiterate enough of how proud the people were to put their trust in me and to really, and our team of field organizers who were out there almost every day just doing voter registration, drive-through voter registration, just being able to realize the importance of getting out there, registering, casting their ballot when the election came around, just being able to have conversation on a one-on-one basis despite the pandemic, and just really encourage people to come out and register to vote. And after the election, the faces, and even during the election itself, that change in them. When we first approached them before the pandemic, when we knocked on their doors, that we were met with so much skepticism, we were met with so much negative energy. But when the election came around that day, you could see people's just the whole demeanor just change, and they were wanting this. There was that renewed hope and strength, and just wanted to make this happen for themselves. And you know, that was, I think, was the most moving moment of all. And I had experienced this back in 2018 when we helped out with voter registration across southern San Juan County as well. And so just seeing the people's faces and the number of people that were in line to just cast their ballot, that was, and people just reaching out to us to ask us, where's the drop box? What do I do with my mail-in ballot? When do I send it back? What do I need to do and we were just, with the outpour of people just wanting to make this possible, it was just overwhelming. It was just, you know, it's something that I don't think I will ever forget.
Well, we owe a debt of gratitude to you and to everybody there, because like really between Black voters in Georgia and Navajo folks and Indigenous folks in Arizona, you know, like it's literally like the country feels like it got saved, you know, like I know there's many.
We did the work, for sure. We did the work, but it was the people. They were wanting that for the longest time. You know, when I first went to work for Rural Utah Project, it's like, when is the change going to happen? We want change. We need to see that. We always get new candidates come knocking on our door. We don't hear from them when we vote for them. When are we going to see? How can you guarantee? And it was just like, look, we have 2 Navajo candidates on the ballot. We have the opportunity to make that change. You have that opportunity to make that change. You make it possible. You cast your ballot, and let's see what happens. Yeah. Right before the 2018 election in San Juan County, people are like, what do you think? You think it's going to be a close election? Do you think they're going to win? And I was like, oh yeah, definitely, without a doubt, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And sure enough, it did. You know, it was just the whole fact that people had faith in this change, and they wanted to see that change happen, and they made it possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so I remember when I was calling out there, and I didn't do anything like what you were doing, just some calls, you know, a few nights to Navajo County. And I remember why I kept calling there is because people kept picking up. Everybody was like picking up, wanting to talk. It'd be like 10-minute conversations. And I was just calling with voter information, you know, like how to get where were the early drop boxes and where were, like, you know, just things like that. But I heard some stories, you know, that seemed to me very voter suppression-y, like people having a really hard time getting ballots, like, you know, working on it for days and being like, I've been trying to get my ballot for days and I can't get it. And like, I don't know if it's going to the wrong address. And so how have you seen in the past, or even now, how does voter suppression affect the Navajo?
It really affects them because we lack the infrastructure across Navajo. 40% of the Navajo Nation lack infrastructure. We don't have road maintenance. You know, a lot of the roads going through Navajo Nation, those aren't being maintained because the people aren't voting. And when individuals vote, they're being counted. They're being seen as somebody who does reside on the Navajo Nation. And there is people that are residing on the Navajo Nation who do need to benefit from the federal money that does come through to the indigenous nations. And so I think that was part of the education that we were educating the people on was, you know, it's important for you to vote. We need to have the federal government recognize you as an individual who resides on Navajo, so they can say when money is being drawn out to different indigenous nations, we can get that money to your community. Yeah. And the same thing with the census that was happening at the same time. We partnered with them to help them to get people to go to their census drives as well, and to be able to get counted that way as well. And those are the 2 things that we felt were very important. So we helped with the census drive as well.
Beautiful. And I remember hearing a story. So I was telling my group of ladies that I do activism work with about the plus codes that you helped get installed. So, for instance, like a woman that I called on the reservation was like, "Oh yeah, so I can't get my ballot because of my address." And so that's kind of an issue, right? On has been an issue in the past on reservations is the addresses are different, and so it's hard um, for mail and other things to happen. But it really impacts. You would think, oh, it's an address. How much does that impact? Well, it impacts your ability to vote, but it also impacts things like healthcare and so you were saying in an interview before that it has affected like your family personally, you know, not having an address, but now you have these plus codes that actually help people get healthcare, right?
Yes, absolutely. The A lot of the times when there was an emergency on the Navajo reservation, we weren't able to get an ambulance or even a sheriff or anyone from the police department to come out for 2 hours. And sometimes they wouldn't even show up until 4 hours or until the next day because they didn't get the exact location of where the emergency was taking place. And so a lot of the times, and that's how we lost a lot of family members and community members was just because people couldn't find us. We didn't have just your standard addressing, street addressing, like you would find in the suburban area. And Plus Code has been very beneficial because we are able to pinpoint a location of 3 meters by 3 meters. And so it's almost exact to where the location of any individual would be at. Like if you went on Google Plus Code and you were hitchhiking down the road and you needed to get your picked up, you would just go on Google Maps, put your finger on the screen itself, and it'll drop a pin. And when it'll a menu will pop up at the bottom of the screen. You'll pull that up, and you'll have Plus Code with a series of alphanumerical numbers. And it would have a plus code in there. And so you would just copy that, put it in the search, and tell the individual that whoever you're wanting to pick you up, put it in their search bar, and Google Maps would automatically find your location. It's
Wow.
that specific as to where you're standing on the side of the road if you're hitchhiking.
Great. That's it's so awesome that you guys are doing that. And I hope they can do that we can do that in other places, right? In
Oh,
other,
absolutely. Right now, we're just trying to finish up southern San Juan County, which was our pilot area. And so we are hoping to get more resources to do addressing across Navajo and maybe find another organization or partner with another organization to continue addressing the Navajo Nation. We've worked with the Navajo rural addressing as well, and so he's only one individual with another staff member who's helping to try to get street addresses to different parts of Navajo Nation, but he's only one person, and it's 27,000 square miles of Navajo reservation that he's trying to cover.
wow. Yeah. So I wanted to also talk to you about another issue that you're working on right now that you've been interested in for a while, with cleaning up uranium mines on the Navajo Nation. So um, Tara was telling me about this and I read about it yesterday and I was just like, so essentially I'm going to read it because it's so like, from 1944 to 1986, nearly 30 million tons of uranium were extracted from Navajo lands under leases with the Navajo Nation. And so that was for nuclear weapons. And Navajo people worked in those mines. And of course, they were not told that they were being exposed to radiation. Also, there were scientific studies that were being done to see what the impact of radiation was on people who had been exposed to it, but they didn't know that there was scientific research being done on them to see what was happening. So the good news is that they stopped mining a long time ago now. And actually Biden just signed in, they've been working on like cleaning up some of the uranium mines. And Biden just signed a contract with a couple of companies, I think 2 of the companies that he signed a contract with are actually Native American run, which is great. And they're contracted to start cleaning up these mines. So, so it sounds like you've been working on a documentary, right? And interviewing people and seeing what the impact is of, after they worked in these mines. So can you tell us a little bit about the interviews you've been doing? And
Oh, absolutely. After I had retired from construction back in 2016, I was left with, okay, I had all this time on my hand. I just, I needed something to do. I was trying to find my niche in the world. And right before my sister had registered me for school, I had come across this article about a Superfund site in New Mexico, and read the article and was really curious about it, and wondered about the uranium sites on the Utah portion of the Navajo reservation, because we have a site just to the west of us in Hulchita, Utah. And so we started reading and doing some research on it, and the number that I had come up with while I was doing my research on uranium mines across Navajo was 523. That was the number that they kept putting out in different medium and newsletters and just different things in the news and stuff. But just recently, having worked with and conversing with Dr. Tommy Rock, we have realized and come to understand that there is more than 525 uranium sites. Each uranium site, the smaller they are and the closer they are together, they're grouped together and counted as one. So there is over 1,000 uranium sites across Navajo Nation itself. And it's no wonder our families and our loved ones are dying from different forms of cancers. Yeah. And we don't have the quality health facilities that we need. If we need to go see a specialist, until about a couple of years ago, a lot of our family members were having to travel 6 hours out of their way to see a specialist. I had an aunt who was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 17 years old, and the nearest place that she could go to get any type of care on a day-to-day basis was at a nursing home in Blanding, Utah.
Wow.
And unfortunately, she lost her battle to leukemia. And that was when I first became aware of what cancer was and what it meant in my family. After she had passed, we started to lose a number of families throughout the year through different types of cancer. I remember a story that my brother, Mark Mariboy, had told my mom. It just happened to be there visiting my mom, and uranium was brought up, and he would tell a story about how his older brother and sister were sent down into the mine shaft with lunch to take to their dad, and his brother would take a tin cup and run it alongside the mine shaft walls to collect water, and once they've collected that water, fill their cup, they would drink the water. And so just exposure to that extent. And I remember my grandfather also working at the mine, the uranium site out by Monticello, Utah, telling stories about how kids would run out in the summer, and the water would be trickling from these mine shafts, and they would collect in a pool, and the kids would go out on a sunny summer day and just play in that water. Mm. And so going forward and fast forward, and I have other individuals in the community who work as nurse or who work as home care, and just see our family members, our loved ones, dying these extremely excruciating, painful deaths due to uranium exposure, due to the cancers. And we don't have the quality facilities that you would find in the larger towns, in the suburban areas. And so having seen and heard that, yes, I started to do a documentary, interview individuals across Navajo, and that's something that I've kind of put aside, but that story tends to resurface every time I go out into the field and I talk to family members, that uranium is constant. It's a constant thing in everybody's life across Navajo. And so it's something that I will continue to work on, but right now I'm just, whenever I get a chance to, whenever I'm in between the work that I'm doing, I will talk to individuals and ask to see if they would be willing to do an interview. And so by just collecting those interviews, and hopefully someday soon, I would be able to do a documentary on it.
Beautiful. Yeah, just to at least raise awareness on it, right? And hopefully these sites are going to get cleaned up.
Absolutely. We had a congressman come down to our chapter in Mexican Water, who, when he first was elected into office, and uranium was brought up, and his response was, "I did not realize uranium was an issue on Navajo. Never heard of it. Did not know anything about it." And it's like, why? It's been here for almost half a century.
Yeah. Yeah. So what other issues, like, I know you're just working on all of these different things right now, and there's so much to be done, it sounds like, and you seem like a very pragmatic person too, like you have big ideas and you're also just trying to get shit done. But what's your vision for the future? What issues to you are most important? What would like a thriving Navajo community look like to you, or indigenous community? I know you were saying when we were talking before that COVID kind of made you realize in some ways that that people, like, in some ways Navajo people live like without resources, but then in other ways people have lived without resources for a while, and maybe they don't want to,
Mm.
maybe they don't want to be living with a lot of resources. So what's your vision? Like, what do you think needs to happen next and in the future?
Well, growing up, I was fortunate enough to grow up in the city, and then also on the Navajo reservation as well. We would follow my mom, or for whatever reason, we would move to the city, whether that was following my dad while he worked at as a structural steel, and then come home in the summer and stay with my grandmother while both our parents were at work. And so having that type of life, having both the traditional Navajo teaching and then also the knowledge that you would gain in the city, it brought to mind how, for me, from my perspective and the work that I'm doing currently, Navajo is exactly where it needs to be. Navajo needs to relearn to live off the land like our ancestors did. Why are we fighting for bear's ears? Why are we doing all this work to bring sovereignty food back into our daily lives? Why are we making this movement when we need to take a couple of steps back and realize and say, wait a minute, where exactly do we want to be? Yes, infrastructure is nice, running water and electricity is nice, but we also need to go back and appreciate the land of what Mother Earth has given us and provided for us. So going forward with the work that I'm doing and the awareness that I would like to leave for today's youth to carry on into the next generation is to really consider what Western society has brought into our lives and what Western society has taken away from us, and really make that balance and understand where it is that we need to be. And again, growing up on the Navajo Nation and in the city, I had the best of two worlds. I understood I had to learn how to balance those two worlds, but also being raised with the traditional knowledge and culture from my grandmother, and then being raised with a Christian background through my mom and my dad. So having to balance those two worlds as well. And so I was having to balance 4 different worlds. And just, I struggled with it as a teenager and as a young adult. But now moving forward, now that I'm in my mid-40s, I've learned to balance all of that and just try to figure out what we need to make happen for tomorrow and for the next generation. Where do we find that balance? Where do we say, okay, this is what we want to put forth. This is what we want to bring back from our ancestors. This is our story, yes, but when do we find the balance to say, okay, this is what we'll take from Western society. This is what we'll continue to reclaim from our ancestors.
Yeah, it's a conversation we all need to have, right? Like
Absolutely.
For us too, it's like just the balance of being like, this isn't working, this isn't working the way that it's been going. And though I don't have a traditional background to draw from, just having these types of dialogues and conversations and trying to figure out what is the best way forward, I think is so important right now. So you said when we were talking to that you didn't want to say you were thankful for COVID, obviously, because of all the destruction, but in a way you were thankful for COVID because it's brought Indigenous issues to the forefront. And so now that more people are aware of Indigenous issues and want to help, what can we do to help?
Ooh, that's a right now with what Rural Utah Project has done, being approached by a non-Indigenous led organization to, the whole idea of non-Indigenous people coming to me and asking for my help. And, I resisted when they first approached me. I turned them down 3 or 4 times before I actually really hired on with Rural Utah Project. It's a lot of consideration that needs to take place with different organizations, especially non-Indigenous folks that want to come on to these on Indigenous lands and to help the people. Actually, we had this conversation last night with the women of Bears Ears. There are 2 conversations that are happening. We have the traditional knowledge and the cultural knowledge. That conversation we understand as Indigenous people. But we're also having these conversations with Western society who do not have that understanding or the knowledge. And so there needs to be a cultural sensitivity that needs to take place and understanding that needs to take place. And so instead of having 2 different conversations, we need to decide where we want to meet in the middle and try and understand one another to really see spirituality and Mother Earth and being rooted to Mother Earth through everything that she has provided to us, for us, is something that Indigenous nations hold sacred. And to understand that the spirituality of that is so complex in itself. You hear it in our prayers, in our ceremony, at our ceremonies, and through the songs, and just in the teaching in itself, and how you have to encompass and embrace everything: the water, the air, the land, the animals, just everything work together for a reason. They were provided for us for a reason to work with one another. And somewhere along those lines, we need to make that possible as well with one another. Rural Utah Project made it a point to hire individuals that were from those communities, who were familiar with the community members and the people and the language and just different issues that were people had those conversations with one another and were familiar with it. And so I think Rural Utah Project did a really good job of selecting individuals off of Navajo. We were able to be out for about a month on the ground, doing door-to-door, knocking on doors and tabling. But as soon as March rolled around, we were shut down for about 2.5 months. And then we were given the yellow light we could go ahead, but we were, we need to have PPEs. And so we decided, we came up with a plan to just purchase a number of gallon-sized freezer bag, put voter registration forms in there, put pins in there, fill organizers' contact information, and just tie rubber bands to them and tie them to the doorknobs, and then just reach out to those family members and friends. People that we had registered before COVID, we reached out to them and we asked them to reach out to their friends and family, and so we could get a number of their families and friends registered as well that way, by just dropping off voter registration forms. That worked for a little while until we were shut down again for the second time for another month or so. And so by then we had come up with a plan to do the drive-through voter registration where people would just pull up. We would, once they pull up at the first table, we take their information, we look up their information using our cell phones, and cell services are the greatest across Navajo Nation. So a lot of the times we would have to try to come up with other means, just take their contact information. So when we came back to town, we would look up their information, call them back, and just give them let them know where their registrations, what their registration status was, if they were registered, if they weren't registered, and so it was a process. It was definitely a process, and it was just days on end. We had people just calling us constantly. What's going on with my voter registration? Where I have not heard anything. I have not received my voter registration card. This is what we're missing. This is what I'm told I'm missing. So it was constant. We needed people to just man the phone almost on a daily basis. And we weren't able to do it as field organized because we were out in the field, and again we didn't have we were limited on the cell service, and even broadband services weren't the greatest across Navajo. This whole organizing nonprofit, all of this is new to me. Never been involved with politics. Never. I'm just like, no, not for me. Just keep it over there. I don't want nothing to do with it. But in the last few years that I've been with Rural Utah Project, it's taught me so many different things. And in return, I've been able to teach the people across Navajo Nation what it means and why it's important. A lot of people, like I said before, when we first started going door to door, knocking on doors and telling people, hey, we need you to register and vote. We were just met with so much skepticism, distrust. Doors were slammed in our face, but we were persistent. We kept going out there every day, just driving mile after mile, just knocking on doors, tabling at the clinic across southern San Juan County, different clinics, at the chapter houses. We did voter registration drives. We did addressing drives. We just were out there every day, nonstop, anywhere from 10 to 12 hours a day, just nonstop, going. The work that we did on Navajo last year during the 2020 election and prior to the election, we were able to partner with other nonprofit organizations who were doing similar work across Navajo Nation, across Arizona as well. And so it wasn't just Rural Utah Project. And so it helps to have that support out there, and that to keep that momentum going, just to keep the people hopeful, and to show them that change is possible. And our biggest example was San Juan County back in 2018 with the work that we did there. And so absolutely, we're always in need of any form of support that you can give us. If you want to volunteer, by all means volunteer. If that means just texting people, phone banking, there's just so many work that we still have to do, a lot of ground that we have to cover. And mind you, Navajo Nation isn't the smallest nation in the world. 72,000 square miles of Navajo Nation still needs to be covered. We still left a lot of it undone. So we need to go back in there and continue to work across Navajo. All of the above, the federal government, different nonprofit organizations that aren't Indigenous led, and then just individuals that aren't Indigenous from Indigenous nations, working together to help to find a way to understand the Indigenous nations and the people of color, BIPOC. And so just trying to understand where they come from, where they've been, and understanding their truth, and taking that truth and being able to put yourself in their shoe, in the history that they have gone through, the atrocities that they have come through, with their prayers still intact, with their traditional knowledge still intact, their culture still intact, with their prayers and their songs still intact, and just trying to make it work through what, yes, Western society has put them through, whether that's going on this long walk, picking up, slaughtering their livestock, or burning down their crops and their homes and making them go on this 100-mile, 300-mile trek to Bos Redondo. just trying to understand what the people saw in the middle of winter on that trek. You know, we lost infants, we lost our kids, we lost our grandparents, we lost our parents, we lost so many family through that trek across the Navajo Nation to Boss Redondo, and just being able to understand that why there's that disconnect and that distrust from Indigenous nations. The treaties have been broken, and treaties are just finally being brought back to the surface. And Carly, you had mentioned, you know, COVID was in a way a good thing. It showed us as the people that we needed to go back to our traditional teachings, to our traditional knowledge, to our culture, to learn how to be one with Mother Earth again, to be one with nature again, to be able to live off the land, to forage for our medicine, to forage for our food, and just to be able to take that in and just to really give ourselves that identity again. And identity is the one key thing that I think we are losing constantly by us losing our language, which is another thing that Rural Utah Project is working on, is doing a specialized training to help to educate individuals to become interpreters for during the elections, because we saw that in last year 2020's election and 2018 election, where we had elderlies come to the polling places and really didn't have anybody to translate the ballot for them. And so we took the initiative to, in partnering with Navajo Nation Human Rights, Navajo Department of Justice, and just really putting the language back first and foremost back into election, and to just revitalize the language. Oh yeah, I have a friend out there who's been doing some, he's a part of the AIM movement as well, and so just having to strengthen that organization has been, you know, they're doing a lot of prayer runs out there. They're trying to there's just so many different movements happening across different Indigenous nations across the United States. That's just been, you know, one thing or another. Being able to help White Mountain Apache with their addressing using Plus Code is another work that I did. I did the consultation work on that one, and just being able to reach out to other Indigenous nations, to make things possible for them as well, has been something that I've been wanting to do for the last couple of years since I started with Rural Utah Project. But Rural Utah Project is like, wait, we got to stop, we got to slow down here. You know, when we started in 2018, we were basically in the right place at the right time, and people needed to see this change happen. We made that possible, and we just kept going up to 2020. And now this year, we're just taking a couple of steps back to really put down what our strategic plan is going to be for the next several years, what we want to see happen, how we want to make change possible for not just here in San Juan County, Utah, and on the Navajo reservation, but within other Indigenous nations as well.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Tara. Again, I appreciate it. I know you had your grandkids tonight, and you have been working on, and your mom and you, and there's been a lot to work on. So again, I just really appreciate you coming and talking to us. And I'm really excited to share this interview with more people too. So
thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for reaching out to me and asking me to do this interview. I think a lot of it, for me personally, is just to, despite all the traumas that Navajo has gone through and other Indigenous nations have gone through, despite all those traumas, we're still here. We're still elevating our voices. We're still finding our strength. We're still finding our voices, and we're still holding on to who we are and where we've been and where we can be going forward. Well, it was a pleasure to meet you all. Thank you for being here. And thank you again, Carly, for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate it. And really, just being able to share our stories, our truths. It's something that you don't see happening in newspaper articles when we get interviewed by all these news media. It's only bits and pieces of it are taken out, and you don't get to hear the whole interview. So hopefully, we had a lot of people tune in and just really understand the work that we're doing, why we're doing the work that we're doing across Navajo.